Chapter 33, Raising Joey. I moved into Andre Street and left the roommate with a dead puppy behind. Joey, my dog, and I moved in with two girls and paid $90 for the summer. I was thrilled. I had my own bedroom. At the last house, my roommate had to walk through my bedroom to get to her bedroom, and I was pretty sick of that arrangement. The new house also had a backyard and off-street parking. I was happy, and the new roommates were fun. I was still dating Don, too. Don and several others came over for a lazy afternoon of partying. Two boys came over and had the last name of Beaver. We called them Big Beef and Little Beef. We had eaten a few mushrooms that day, just a few, nothing too wild. Don was out front talking to the dog. He came in the house with a white face and said, "I just talked to the dog." "Yeah, okay, Don, whatever you say." We head out the side door where Big Beef and Little Beef were sitting in the back of the pickup truck. The boys had backed in next to the only tree, and the tree trunk slanted slightly at the bottom, growing up about 4 feet, then splitting into two large branches, creating a nice little crotch. Joey jumps into the crotch of the tree and looked at us with a face just as freaked out as Don's. We started to laugh and laugh. Was she just messing with us? Or did Don actually just communicate with her? Big Beef and Little Beef were laughing but stopped abruptly and asked Don when they were going to come down from the high. Don had just spoken to the dog, for God's sakes. Why would you ask him that? I laughed and knew they probably wouldn't like the answer. Don looked up and said, "Oh, you never come down from shrooms." This was not the answer they wanted, and they looked very dejected. We all started to laugh because Don meant that esoterically, not realistically. Of course they would come down. But some part of them would always remember and appreciate the experience. So Don always said you never come down from anything. They asked again and again and got the same answer. This went on for a while until they just got up and left. I tried to get Don to stop, but it was too damn funny. I wondered if they ever came down because I never saw them again. Kind of a dad moment for me, don't you think? Summer life was fun. I was having a hard time keeping my dog home and not running around the neighborhood. I talked to my dad and he told me that when she leaves the property, I should speak to her sternly and command her to return. If she didn't return, he said I should pick up a rock and throw it at her. Tell her to keep going. He said I should tell her if she wasn't going to stay home, then she should leave and not come back. This would teach her boundaries. She would be forced to think about what she wanted, home or roam. She left the yard again, and I called her home in a more and more stern voice. Joey continued walking away, so I picked up a stone and I threw it at her, tapping her on the backside. She looked back at me very thoughtfully. It was actually quite amazing. I could see her thinking. Then she took another step, and I picked up another rock and hit her with it. She looked back, lowered her head, and came back home, where I rewarded her. A neighbor saw the exchange and came out and said if I didn't want the dog, she did. It was a lovely dog. And I said, "Oh, I'm just training her." She kind of looked at me doubtfully. But Joey stuck around the property after that. Joey was mostly a border collie and was smart as a whip with a personality to match. She greeted everyone at the door and sniffed them up and down pretty good, especially the pockets. When the guests sat down, Donna and I could read what kind of pot they had on them. If Joey laid down, they were not holding. If she sat beside them but had her back to them, they were carrying cheap Mexican brown. But if she sat beside them and faced them, it was a better grade of pot, like Colombian. You could tell the grade of the pot by how close or attentive she was to the guest. If she put her nose on that person's pocket, they were holding tie sticks. But if she wouldn't move her nose, no matter what, the pants on that guest was holding hash. We kept this a secret between Don and I, and we could peg people about their stash. One night, after collecting dollar bills and playing and drinking all night, we came home to Joey for entertainment. I had seen a dog that could play wounded. The dog's owner could pretend to shoot the dog, and the dog would crawl forward acting all wounded. And I loved this trick, and that night, a little tipsy, but oh so sure of myself, I announced that I was going to teach Joey how to fall down dead when I pretended to shoot her. There was a huge discussion about my methodology, but I ignored everyone and started out on my own plan. Yeah, fuck the suits and their strict protocol. I shoot Joey and I told her to lay down. Then I flopped on the floor and acted dead. Joey sniffed me up and down till I got up and did it again. I shot myself and dropped to the floor. She sniffed me up and down again. I shoot her, and then I flopped down, over and over. I probably did this like 15 times, but not many more. Everyone in the room was laughing at me, and no one thought it was going to work. We had all had rat lab, and this was not approved scientific methodology. I shoot her again, and she flopped down on the floor, still as could be. We roared, and I mean laughed till our stomachs hurt. She lay there for the longest time and then ever so slyly looked up at us and gently wagged her tail. We lost it again, and she was hooked. She would do this over and over again to entertain us. One weekend, a family gathering was planned in Luzerne, and Don and I headed up to join the fun. Usually these gatherings were in the fall, but the older generation was definitely getting older, and some, like Albert, were so ill that it was decided we would go up in the spring. When we arrived, I mentioned to Dad and Uncle Albert that I was surprised our old ice chest was still standing on the front porch in full view of the road. They agreed and said they too were surprised it had not been stolen. I offhandedly asked if they expected it to be stolen, and they both replied yes. I told them, if you expect someone to steal it, then that someone is going to be me. They said I should do that because with so many families involved in the little cabin, a decision would never be made and a fight would probably arise. I said to never speak of it again, and they agreed. Don and I tried to outwait the family that Sunday, but we wanted to go, and some of the older ones talked about staying another night, so Don and I couldn't take it home with us then. But quick as bunnies, we headed back up that week and loaded the old ice chest into my station wagon, and I've had it ever since. I had forgotten about that old station wagon. It was really handy, and I don't think people understand the joys of a station wagon. This one had a radio that played something other than radio stations. If you adjusted the volume and the station, you could make out the sounds of several types of guns or heavy artillery. This was during the Vietnam War, and we would run down the road pretending we were in Nam in a helicopter. It gave you the weirdest feeling to be making fun of something so traumatic, but somehow it brought the war home to our little station wagon, and we shot up I-75 pretty good on the way home from stealing that old ice chest. We continued working towards Wheatland all summer. We had meetings and made plans, but depended on each other and everyone to do a little more to knit all of these pieces together by the day of the festival. We had never done this before, so we all had to be prepared to jump in and fill in wherever it was needed. Don and the Michigan Fast Movers started playing at a bar out in Remus called the Golden Key. It turned out to be the golden key we needed to push the festival over the edge. We could pack that place on a Friday and Saturday night. It was a small town bar, and the owner had never had his bar so consistently filled. After the boys got kicked out of the Lions Club meeting, it was helpful to get the bar's help legally. To have the festival, we need some insurance, and for this, the bar put up their parking lot for a bond. Can't make it clear enough that each group took over and managed their own area independently. And I should note, without cell phones, only landlines. We got pretty good at judging what others were getting done. We were also good at judging where others were at certain times. With no cell phones, once you left home, no one could reach you unless they knew where you were. You had to be good at finding each other, making meeting points, and sticking to it. If you found a phone booth, it usually was not helpful unless you knew the person was home and you had a bunch of change. Everyone pitched in and created something wonderful and imaginative in their area, so when the day arrived, each contribution was added to the festival like a vase is filled with special individual flowers. I was totally impressed when I got there. They had built a farm stage for sure, a hay wagon with a black plastic roof and sides to block the sun. It was basic but highly functional. They threw a few hay bales around and called it good. The bands pulled the sound system together the first year, which was really handy. The day finally arrived. We picked a weekend right at the end of the summer so it could be the last hurrah for the summer and then back to school. At the time, schools always started after Labor Day. We had buttons made for the tickets, very little printed material, and I'm sure no food or drinks. As we arrived and drove past all the no parking signs, we pulled in by the big rock and parked. My friend Dennis, or Pup as we called him, Came to the first Wheatland, but never again, which was probably good as he fed me a pot brownie just as we arrived. I had never eaten pot before and thought, well, why not? Well, because you have never eaten pot brownies before, that's why, and that's a good reason not to start today. Almost right away, I decided to lay down in front of the stage and promptly fell asleep for a couple of hours. I was pissed when I woke up, and it took about a half an hour to come back to life. I have never forgiven myself for sleeping through even a minute of the first festival. My friend has a picture of me sleeping in front of the stage, and I've been bugging her to find it. It was 30 years or more before I ate a pot brownie again. After the festival, we walked the field searching for any small piece of trash. At the time, pull tabs off from beer and pop cans was a problem. These were little metal rings that popped the top open, peeling back an aluminum teardrop shape. They got thrown away. Well, usually just thrown on the ground. And they would cut your foot if you stepped on them, and they would never degrade, at least not in my lifetime. The other major category to pick up was cigarette butts, but most people took care of their own. We formed lines so we didn't miss one stray piece of trash. When we were done, Don and Craig got out the leftover beer, and we sat down in the shade to relax. At that point, a gentleman farmer walked up and started talking to us. He was a good-looking man with a deep tan and a warm smile. He quizzed us about the festival, and he was very interested in what we had just been doing to clean the field. He actually spent more time talking about our cleaning than whether or not we made any money on the festival. After a rather long conversation, he asked us in a thoughtful manner if we would like to put the festival on his farm. It was much more accommodating with grassy fields, a pine tree forest, and lots of other space for campers. He didn't mention all the stumps that had bees in them, but I'll let that pass. It was almost unbelievable that this man volunteered his farm. We, or at least I, didn't know how to react. I'm sure no one in Kingston would ever offer their farm to bring in city people for a day of fun and music. So that was a new day for me. It felt good to have the Remus postmaster Mark and his wife Gladys Wernette supporting us along with the Golden Key Bar. Now we could really get some traction. I was glad it was over for the year, as school was starting, and I'm pretty sure Don and I had to move again. We rented an old 2-stall garage converted into an apartment. It was small, but it was ours, and we had a lot of fun there. I built us a waterbed while Don stood in doubt. We both collected some furniture, and we even had a desk. My family had gathered in Luzerne in October for many years, but most of the family members were old, and they had gone up in the spring when Don and I stole the ice chest. When I learned that none of the family was going on their old weekend for the first weekend of October, I collected some friends, and up we went. The old cabin was fun, to say the least. It was one large room with 3 sets of double bed bunk beds at one end of the cabin, filling the space. There were little aisles between the sets, and when you got big enough or brave enough, you could jump from one set to the other. They had framed out the beds with pine logs and had created a wonderful lumber camp feel. The center of the room had a large poker table in front of the picture window and a fireplace on the back wall that I had talked about earlier. The other end of the cabin had a piece dedicated to an outside porch, and the other end of that space was the kitchen. The boys had built a plywood low countertop that made an oval bend around the kitchen, affording some really well-placed design. The kitchen had a table for the water buckets and a gas stove. In the corner of the old cabin by the back door was a simple wooden stand that held a washpan below a mirror and cabinet combo. Mother would kick out the boys in the morning, and we were all to step up there and wash up for the day. Mother called it a PTA bath. Pussy, tits, and armpits was a camp bath, but of course I never heard this until I had started menstruating. This was just a review of the rules of womanhood. Outside, we had a well that had to be primed and pumped 100 times to get water, and at least 2 buckets had to be full at all times. These buckets were for drinking, but mostly fire prevention. Out back, the men had built a double-seated outhouse at the end of a well-worn trail. My friends were happy to arrive and enjoyed the rustic cabin for a weekend of music and laughter. My friends laughed and laughed about the sign that said, "Once a king, always a king, but once a knight is enough," and burned it in the fireplace. for years after my brother would ask me what happened to the sign. School went well that fall, and it was fun to be way off campus in a more stable environment. Don wasn't much more stable than me, but at least we weren't moving every 3 or 4 months. We continued organizing ways to party in bars and get the dollar admission. Our main avenues were still the Blackstone in downtown Mount Pleasant and the Golden Key out in Remus. Since we could bring 50 drinkers with us, the bars stayed very supportive. New Year's Eve was coming up quick, and we booked the Golden Key for the night. The owner paid the band and beer, and this was always cheaper than getting paid and buying the drinks. The owner of the Golden Key figured that out, too. The night was ushering in New Year's Eve with a massive snowstorm. The snow was falling sideways, and the temperature dropped below 15 with the wind to match. The boys started their first set with, "Hi, hello, how are you?" Al Fields was playing stand-up bass, and the Hosners, Jim and Larry, were playing percussion and controlling the soundboard. That night, Ken was on the piano and drinking Heineken beers, a habit started in Mount Pleasant at the Blackstone. Now, he had a line of empty beer bottles all the way across the top of the upright piano and was starting on a line across the sheet music holder when the owner announced, "No more free beer." We were closing in on midnight, heading into January 1975. Don used the microphone to tell the bartender that the music has stopped until they get a shot. Jim was leaning on the back wall and looked like he was going to slide down to his butt at any moment. The crowd cheered, and the bartender appeared with a tray of tequila shots for the band and several of us highly important support personnel. This party was definitely underway when a very special surprise appeared at the back of the bar, and we all stopped to enjoy the view. Somebody got way too excited and stripped out in the back parking lot. The man decided to streak the bar back to front. His intention, anyway, is to run to the front of the bar, out the front door, and then around the back to the back parking lot where he would get dressed. Fine with us. We are well trained and very good at helping. And at this point, we started to squeeze down the path to the front door. Just a little at first, and then a little more as he got closer to the band on the front door. Finally, he is swimming in bodies that could care less he has a plan, and he may or may not be getting cold. Then the streaker got a real shock. The front door was open, and the snow had made a nice swoop around the door, framing it. The streaker decided he didn't want to go out the front door, but wanted instead to re-streak the bar and go out the back door. "No way!" Everyone screamed and pushed him out the front door onto the sidewalk. His poor little body was purple by then. He looked back at us with a look of disbelief which just made us laugh harder. It didn't take him long to run around the block, get dressed, and join us back inside. We all cheered when he returned from the back parking lot, and the band started back up. The band was thoroughly inebriated after the tequila shot and the streaking man. Soon it was midnight, but that cheer was slightly less than the streaking man when he tried not to go out the front door. The days of free beer were over. We still got $1 at the door, and the band still got paid. But they spent it all every time they played. Again, it was definitely better when they got free beer. At Thanksgiving, we had a farm party we attended at Renee Applegate's every year. Her husband raised turkeys, and they would butcher 2 of them, and then Renee and Denny would cook them up for the big dinner. They gathered tables and chairs for the day, and we would all eat together. We found this important for our little clan, and most of us never missed it for 35-plus years. The party has moved a couple of times, but Saturday after Thanksgiving stays the same. This was our consistent plan for Thanksgiving, but usually we had to be more creative for Christmas. That Christmas, most students went home, but Don and I did not. We might head to Kingston for Christmas Day and then maybe another day, but we would head back to Mount Pleasant as soon as possible. Mother always had a little guilt for us to swallow before leaving. That year, we headed back and we pulled through town and we noticed our friend Sue Wood's house had burned to the ground except for a little corner of the dining room where her beloved upright piano stood. It was a sad sight. We pulled in and surveyed the situation, then headed over to Harold Street where we lived in the 2-stall garage. When we saw Sue after vacation, we learned that no one, not even the landlord, had called her to tell her about the fire. So as excited as can be to get back to college after a long holiday break, she pulled into the drive to see firsthand her house and piano standing there all forlorn. To say the least, Sue was mad at us for not calling. I felt bad, but I didn't know how or where to call her. I will admit, though, it must have been a great shock. School started and time slipped by easily. I still loved going into the student lounge and talking with professors and grad students. I learned so much from them in that informal setting. I often struggled with concepts that didn't apply to farm kids. I was still working on that culture thing, but I loved Maslow's hierarchy of needs and personal fulfillment. That theory I could understand and apply to my own life. The first level of the theory states that we must take care of our physiological needs first: water, warmth, food. These provide us with the basics of life. Then second, we need safety and security, and third, we need to feel like we belong and receive love. Fourth, we seek a feeling of accomplishment and prestige, and then the final big deal at the top is self-actualization, where you can achieve your full potential. Winter was finally seen its last hurrah, and it was decided we would head out to the country for a day of early green growth and mud. I still had that beloved station wagon that shot bullets and artillery shells from the radio, and it held 6 people easily, and maybe I had one in the back storage area. I drove and soon had us on this wonderful country road. The road was hilly and with big old growth trees overarching the road. The buds were just starting on the trees, and the ferns were still little fiddleheads. I headed to a place called Bundy Hill, which is the highest point in Isabella County. We had had many April showers to herald the May flowers, and the road was pretty muddy. It was a consistent type of muddy road. The top 3 inches evenly muddy. This felt like our old 2-track headed back to the farm pond, and I found myself totally in my element. Not many of my skills transferred to college life very well, but now I was at home driving the El Camino and racing Bill to the back of the farm. My friends were packed into the car. I was totally concentrating on driving. Up one side of the hill, make sure I didn't reach the apex at the middle of the road. I had many memories of accidents at the top of a country hill, so you learn to always return to your lane just as you reach the top. But then back to the center as you head down the other side of the hill, at which point you have to gun the car to make it through the trough, and then up the other side with enough momentum, and then make sure you're in your lane when you reach the top of the hill. Over and over I did this. I was totally in the zone. I actually forgot about everyone else in the car, and they were not saying a word, which added to my forgetting about them. I turned on the radio every mile or so and shot something with the artillery sound. Another factor in this fun was rear-wheel drive. To feel the back end of a car sliding around and then sitting in the back of the station wagon is special. Some days, real special. Just a little slide to the middle, and then a little slide to the edge, slow and even sways that make you feel like you're in a blow-up raft called Mr. Stiffy behind a boat driven by a drunk. When I pulled in and parked, I heard this collective sigh and turned to see my friends' relief on their faces that we had made it. I never thought for 1 minute we wouldn't make it out to Bundy Hill, but I could see that they had wondered every inch of the way. That Easter, Don and I headed back to Kingston, this time wanted to find the Hosner boys, who had grown up close to us but were bused to another school, so we didn't know each other until college. They were just past Wilmot on North Kingston Road by the sawmill. I knew that area well. Their house in Mount Pleasant was a hoot and reminded me of Kingston. They had a motorcycle in the living room, plywood countertops, and exposed insulation. They had every mechanical tool known to man, and most were within reach. Their house in Wilmot had their mother living there, so it was much neater and cleaner. She was a very nice woman and invited us in. There stood in the kitchen a half-and-half kitchen stove and oven. One half was a wood stove and the other side a propane gas stove. She told me she had just bought it at the Kingston hardware store. She bought it right off the floor. I always wished I'd ask her how much it cost. Later, Don headed back up to their house and they walked next door to the sawmill. That old mill had stood there for 2 generations or more. In the corner stood a slice of old-growth oak tree with some of the bark remaining on the edges. The man told Don and Jim that had stood there his whole working career, just stood there in the corner gathering dust for over 40 years. He gave the board to Don. Jim and Don loaded it up in the old station wagon, and we brought it back to Mount Pleasant. Don and his friend Bert sanded that thing and built us a nice cradle for it to sit in, and we have the loveliest table for almost 50 years. Years.